I've always been a connoisseur of silence. There's a purity to it, a blank slate upon which the world can write its most subtle truths. My name is Arthur Phelps, and for 3 years I was the sole caretaker of the NOAA atmospheric monitoring station on the summit of Mount Washington, New Hampshire. At 6,288 feet, it's the highest peak in the northeastern United States, a place famously known as the home of the world's worst weather. I thought I understood isolation. I thought I understood cold. I was wrong. What I learned up there wasn't about weather. It was about what the wind sometimes carries with it. The station was a fortress of concrete and steel, built to withstand hurricane-force winds and temperatures that could freeze a man solid in minutes. My shifts were week-long solo vigils, my only company the hum of servers and the shriek of the wind. My predecessor, an old-timer named Frank, had given me one piece of advice on my first day, his grizzled face uncharacteristically serious. "You hear anything on the shortwave that don't sound right, Artie? You just turn it off. Don't listen. Some static ain't meant to be deciphered." I'd laughed it off then. The old man was superstitious, a relic of a bygone era. My era was one of data and reason. For the first 2 years, nothing happened that my instruments couldn't explain. Then, in the deep freeze of January, it began. A nor'easter of historic proportions was slamming into the summit. The wind gauges were pegged at 130 miles per hour. The building shuddered under the assault. Outside the triple-paned windows, the world was a swirling, white void. The satellite internet was down. The landline was dead. My only link to the outside world was the emergency shortwave radio. I was running a diagnostic check when I first heard it. Faint, beneath the hiss of solar static, a voice. It was a child, a little girl. She was singing, a nursery rhyme. "Rock-a-bye baby on the treetop. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock." The signal was weak, fading in and out. A burst of pity cut through me. Some family's emergency radio, their kid probably scared out of her mind, her transmission bouncing off the ionosphere into my headphones. I keyed the mic. "This is NOAA Station WX1M on Mount Washington. Little girl, are you there? Can you tell me your name? Over." The singing stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. Then, a small, clear voice. "My name is Emily. The man in the snow says it's time to play." A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature crept down my spine. The delivery was flat, emotionless. "The man in the snow?" "Emily, are you in trouble? Where are you? Over." "He's right behind you," she whispered. I spun my chair around. Nothing but the empty operations room, banks of servers blinking green in the dim light. My own reflection, pale and wide-eyed, stared back from the dark window. I was alone. I shook my head. A prank. A sick, twisted prank on an emergency frequency. Someone with a high-powered ham radio, messing with the guy stuck on the mountain. I took off the headphones, my heart still thumping. I decided Frank was right. Some static wasn't worth it. But an hour later, the pull was too strong. I had to know. I put the headphones back on. The static was gone. The channel was crystal clear. And Emily was still there. But she wasn't alone. A new voice was with her. A man's voice, deep and raspy, as if his vocal cords had been shredded by ice. It was humming along with the nursery rhyme. "When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall." "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice tighter than I intended. "This is a restricted government frequency. Identify yourself. Over." The humming stopped. The man's voice spoke, each word a slow, deliberate scrape of sound. "The bough is breaking, Arthur." He knew my name. My blood turned to ice water. I ripped the headphones off and threw them onto the console. This wasn't a prank. This was something else. I spent the next hour checking and rechecking every system. Everything was functioning perfectly. The storm raged on. The building continued to moan under the wind's assault. Then, The motion sensor on the outside deck alarm went off. The readout indicated movement right outside the main door. In 130 miles per hour winds, in minus 50-degree wind chill. Nothing could survive out there. Nothing human. I peered through the door's reinforced glass porthole. Nothing but a wall of driving snow. I was about to dismiss it as a malfunction when a shape resolved in the whiteness. A small, dark shape. A doll. A porcelain-faced doll in a faded blue dress sitting upright against the door. Its glassy eyes were staring directly at me. How? Who could have put it there? A soft tap, tap, tap came from the door. Not the random battering of the wind. A polite, deliberate knocking. I stumbled backward, away from the door. My mind raced, scrambling for rational explanations. There were none. The shortwave crackled to life on the console speaker. No headphones needed now. Emily's voice filled the room, sweet and horrifying. He says you have to let him in. He's cold. The man's raspy voice followed, not from the radio, but from right outside the door. Let me in, Arthur. The door handle began to jiggle. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran to the control panel and hit the emergency lockdown. Steel shutters slammed down over the windows and doors with a final, deafening clang. I was sealed in. Safe. The pounding started immediately. Not a knock. A furious, violent hammering on the steel shutter, a sound of immense brute strength that shouldn't exist. The metal began to dent inward. Over the cacophony, the shortwave blared, the man's voice screaming now, full of a rage so ancient and cold, it felt like the heart of the storm itself. You can't silence the wind. We see you. We've always seen you. The power went out. The emergency lights flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows. The hammering stopped. The only sound was the wind, which now seems to have a voice, forming words in its howl. My name, over and over. Arthur. Arthur. I spent the night huddled in the supply closet, a knife in my hand, listening to the storm scream my name. I was certain I was going to die, that the shutters would tear free and something would come in and take me. But dawn came. The wind began to die down. The power flickered back on. The shutters retracted. The world outside was pristine, blanketed in feet of new snow. The doll was gone. There were no footprints, no signs of anything amiss. It was as if it had all been a fever dream born of isolation and storm stress. The recovery team arrived 2 days later when the access road was cleared. I didn't tell them everything. I said the storm had been bad, that I'd had a few hallucinations from the pressure. They nodded sympathetically. Happens to the best of us up here, one said. As they were preparing to escort me down, one of the techs called me over to the shortwave console. Hey Art, you been running audio recordings? The hard drive is full of this one file. He clicked play. It was my voice, hours and hours of it, recorded through the night. It was the sound of me sobbing, praying, and begging for my life. And underneath my voice, almost subliminal, was another sound. The soft, clear voice of a little girl, whispering the same phrase over and over on a loop. He says he'll see you downstairs. I quit that day. I moved to Tucson, Arizona, as far from snow and wind as I could get. I thought I'd escaped. But last night I was taking out the trash. The desert air was still and warm, and a gust of wind, a single, solitary gust, shot down the alleyway. It was cold. It carried the smell of pine and frost, and on that gust, so faint I almost missed it, was a sound. A little girl, giggling. The wind doesn't just blow on mountaintops. It blows everywhere, and it has a long, long memory. Have you ever heard a voice on the radio or in the wind that felt like it was meant for you and you alone? What did it say? share your story in the comments. Sometimes, the most terrifying messages aren't broadcast to the world, but whispered on a frequency only you can hear.